So, hallo, herzlich willkommen hier im Frankfurt Pavilion auf der Frankfurter Buchmesse. Schön, dass Sie alle hier sind. Ich hoffe, Sie haben eine schöne Zeit heute, trotz der großen Schlangen und Menschenmassen in den Hallen. Und ja, ich freue mich, dass Sie den Weg hier zu uns gefunden haben, wo wir jetzt in den nächsten 50 Minuten über ein sehr, sehr aktuelles Thema sprechen. Bei allen Krisen, die gerade auf der Welt passieren, ist es schwer, den Überblick zu behalten.
It is very difficult to keep an overview on the current crises in the world. A lot of things are happening. And one of the things that is really very dear to us and worrying is the question about the development of the climate around the world, the climate crisis. And today we'd like to discuss the climate crisis, climate protesters, and the liberty of assembly, protect the protest. I am very glad to have three people here on the panel who have a lot of expertise and know-how in this topic to talk about this topic. Let me briefly introduce to my left Paula Zimmermann from Amnesty International. She is an expert for the liberty of free speech and assembly, and she is responsible for the campaign Protect the Protest. She is co-organizer of this panel, so a very warm welcome to you. Next to her, Miriam Herrmann. Miriam is very committed for Last Generation, and she coordinates the legal department of Last Generation. She studies law and is herself organizer of some activities in order to protest against the climate crisis. So we'll talk about it more later, but first of all, a very warm welcome also to you, Miriam. Next is Joschka Seelinger. He is a lawyer and coordinator of the Association for the Rights for Liberty. And in many ways, they are dealing with the topic liberty of assembly. And also currently, when we talk about climate protests, thank you and a warm welcome to you. We are on a first-name basis here on stage, not because we know each other so well, but it's because we are in the same age group, an age group where it's easy to be on a first-name basis. Other panels do differently. Some people know each other and still are not on a first-name basis in public on the panel because they want to be professional. I think let's be professional and be on a first-name basis at the same time, not a contradiction in terms. I'd like to start a video. Michael Forst sent the video. He's the special envoy of the United Nations for climate protection. He sent a video message. He would love to be here, but on a short-term basis he could not make it. But thank you for sending your video message. I'm very happy to attend this event of Amnesty International and to be able to speak. The campaign Protect the Protest of Amnesty is essential for the support of those who protect the environment. And they are always confronted with repression. It is important that those who defend the basic rights and activists who do not know about the international human rights forums can count on the support of such an organization alone.
And since I've been elected in June 22 as the first UN Special Rapporteur on environmental defenders under the Aarhus Convention, I have conducted dozens of country visits where I met with many defenders, including climate activists using civil disobedience. And I have identified a pattern of repression against them at least at 4 levels. First, and that for me very important, in public discourses, there is an increasingly negative portrayal of environmental defenders and activists by public officials and the media. And they use defamatory terms like eco-terrorists and create the conditions for the repression by the authorities, but also, it's important for violence from the public. Like when activists are called criminals, that's very easy to treat them as such. And some people then think it's okay to drag an activist from the car, pulling them by hair, or railing of them with a car. And these discourses has a very concrete and dangerous chilling effect. Secondly, there is a pattern of repression in the legal framework. In many countries in Europe, you see changes in the law and policies specifically targeting environmental activism and seeking to restrict freedom of protest and other fundamental rights. I know you are familiar with the situation in Germany that you are going to discuss today, but there are also many examples, like in Italy, with the so-called eco-vandals law, or in France, or in Spain, or elsewhere in Europe. And thirdly, the repression is also visible at law enforcement levels. Policing methods and persecution are often disproportionate and arbitrary. This is the case ahead of protests, with heavy surveillance measures like home searches, phone tapping, police infiltration of climate movements, but also during protests, with systematic identity checks, with arrest of journalists, and countless cases of police brutality. And the awful Pengrave in Germany are just one example of that. And according to Article 1 of the Convention Against Torture, this is clearly torture. And after protests, we have many examples of abuses in detention, including humiliation, like denial of access to toilets in Spain, Germany, or forced street searches in Portugal. And finally, we also see an increasingly harsh response in courts and at the judiciary level, with pre-trial detention extended up to 30 days in Bavaria, or activists being banned from entire cities or regions for having taken distributed flyers in Italy, or 3 years of prison for blocking a bridge in the UK, etc., etc. As you can see, state response to environmental civil disobedience includes clear abuses of the OV and sometimes amount to severe human rights violations. And yet, the triple environmental crisis of climate change, pollution, and loss of biodiversity will not be addressed if those who fight against it are repressed for it. This is, for me, a major human rights and civic space issue that has still a significant chilling effect on the wider society. That's why I encourage leading human rights organizations like Amnesty to engage in this work and to do so by reaching out to the first affected on the front lines, like member of last generation present here today. And at my level, I can assure you that this issue will remain a priority under my mandate. And to all activists, climate activists, I want to say, you have been heard, you are not alone. I wish you a very fruitful event. Thank you very much.
Ja, vielen Dank.
So, thank you, Michel, first, and greetings. Maybe he watches our stream. Welcome if you watch the stream, and welcome everybody else who watches our stream live. We are also on a live stream. So thank you to everybody who helped us to contact Michel Forst. Paula, would you like to tell us a little bit more about the global context? We're currently in a global context. Yes, I'd love to. Let me connect the different categories. So there is state repression against the climate activisms, and he says 4 things: more stringent laws, draconian measures. There is repression from police, from public authorities. And he also talks in a way and manner that people feel criminalized in their discourse. It is a political or media criminalization of the climate protection movement. And I'd like to give you some examples. Some examples he mentioned. If you look at the more stringent laws, Amnesty International sees more stringent laws when we talk about the liberty of assembly in many countries in the world at the moment. One example is Great Britain. The direct answer to activities of extinguish rebellions and just stop all in 2022 and 2023. There were big law packages, having a large impact on the liberty of assembly. So the police has easier access to start doing something if there is a protest, and protest is framed as disruptive, as something that disturbs. In Australia, we encounter the same situation. Sometimes public infrastructure, they have tens of thousands of dollars with fines or penalties and a couple of months in prison. Secondly, where can it lead? So in the recent time, the judges are less lenient. They come up with very severe judgments. Again, Great Britain, in April of this year, 2 activists were sentenced, Morgan Ronald and Marcus Deckerts, to once 3 years and 2 years and 7 months in prison. Why? Because there is a bridge in London, and they climbed on a bridge in London and fixed a banner, "Just Stop Oil." And now 3 years in prison. So just imagine what that means. It's not someone who were, those people were not violent against other human beings. They just hang a banner, and it led to 40 hours of traffic jam. So it is 3 years in prison for 2 activists. We see it in other regions of the world. For instance, very sadly, we look into Iran. Iran, at the moment, we all know what is going on, the protests in Iran when the women's liberty movement has founded after the death of Mahsa Amini last year. But in Iran, even before these activities, there was a very stable movement for the protection of the environment, for wildlife, and for responsible usage of water resources. And here again, in the Iran system, activists are sentenced to like 10 years sometimes in prison. And sometimes they are accused of being spies. And we are here, and they are serving their sentence in the very famous Evin prison, where they torture people. The next thing is the discourse. So the French Minister of the Interior also said, le mouvement de la terre are these eco-terrorists. French Minister of the Interior said they are eco-terrorists, and he wanted to prohibit it. And this prohibition was stopped by the law. But the list is very long. Look to the United States, big protests against Cop City, Kenya. Look around the world. It happens everywhere, and it also happens in Germany. Thank you. Thank you for this global context. Let us now talk about the situation in Germany. Joschka, we have our constitution, liberty of assembly. This is one of the central basic rights in our constitution. Every German citizen has the right to assemble with others. Shouldn't that be enough, the right for free assembly? Well, maybe. In Germany, we are a well-functioning democracy, and our state, based on the law, is intact, and nevertheless, we have reason to worry. UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres asked Germany in May of this year that the climate protesters need more protection. Just imagine, the UN Secretary General normally talks to authoritarian countries, not like our country, because we feel well protected by our constitution and the basic rights. And maybe I should be less systematic than Paula and tell you some anecdotes. For instance, Antonio Guterres, at the beginning, members of the last generation had their apartments and houses searched, as you might have heard in the media. They discussed it. It was reflected and communicated in the media. At the same time, on the same day, the website of Last Generation was stopped, and there was a banner, and it said, "Last Generation is a criminal organization, and you are a criminal if you donate money." So you also wonder, we have this central principle of the state based on law, and where you're deemed innocent at any rate. So when we talk about the Last Generation, they say it is a criminal situation. So we normally say the principle is innocent till proven guilty. So you use it, it's a political movement, and you monitor this political movement. So where is the problem here? The problem starts when people start to persecute. We cannot say whether it's open or not, whether a person will be sentenced because they are members of this organization, but Section 129 of the German Penal Code talks about a legal politician. So it's like an opener. So you open as soon as you, before you sentence someone or prosecute, the authorities have the option to block an account, block a website, have a warning, search a person's house. So in this early stage, people are deterred. That's the deterrence effect, not only against members of the Last Generation, but also against the entire civil society. How come? I don't know what happens if you liked the climate movement, if you thought, I might join them or support them, you wonder whether you donate. If the public prosecutor says if you donate, it's a criminal act. The next thing is if accounts are frozen. So the Last Generation, please correct me if I'm wrong, by the way. So they had this non-for-profit organization, and they had the administration of all types of initiatives. Fridays for Future, the Last Generation, or a class in school. So it was a non-for-profit administration of funds. And all funds were frozen and impounded. So everything frozen. So if a university group of University of Mainz had some money administered, so the funds are frozen. So this is really bad. So far, that was a large number of examples. You think, oh, how far are the consequences? How far-reaching are the consequences? Many people are suddenly impacted. So that's why we talk about the liberty of assembly today. It is not only about protesting in order to protect the climate, and these protests suffer, but theoretically, any type of protest suffers. And now we talk about the climate protest. Miriam, you are well known in the general public. In September 2021, we had the International Motor Show outside of Munich, and you did some upseiling activity near Munich at the Autobahn, at the motorway, and you were arrested for it. And last year you had yet another activity that was very much seen by the public. There was a painting, and you threw some mashed potatoes on the glass, protecting a painting of Monet in a museum in the city of Potsdam, and you gave a speech and you glued yourself. So if you hear these things that Paula just said about people who are arrested, people who are sentenced to a sentence, why are you still going on? Well, the question is, if you are active, you ask this question time and time again. It is very, very tiring to do so. There is a lot of pressure. And everybody who's active in the climate protection movement and the Last Generation, and even myself, the moment why I'm doing it and why I have the force, the power to continue, is this emotional connection with what I'm doing. What does it mean? We are just moving very fast towards a climate catastrophe, and this topic hasn't been adequately discussed in the general public and by the politicians. We talk about 4 billion human beings living in regions where you won't be able to live. They will be inhabitable in a couple of years. Many of these people will die from famine, from heat, up to 2030. Round about 700 million people will be refugees. They will have no home. They will look for protection somewhere in this world, on this planet. Drought, scarcity of water will make life very difficult. Prices will increase. Social injustice will increase. Nations will be in an emergency mode in a world where people do not care. So people say we need more fences. People will be isolated. There will be fights in the street. There will be wars. And it sounds very scary. These are scary scenarios. It sounds apocalyptic. But I didn't come up with this. It's not my imagination. This is the scenario that our scientists who have written the IPCC report are telling us. The most renowned scientists in climate research worldwide tell you so. And if you read it and if you think I'm a human being who is alive at this day and age, where it's relevant what we're doing now, then I think I have the inner strength and I have the inner possibility to say something, to get up and say something and do something. I have the inner strength and power for these activities. Before we have started the last generation in my protest against the International Motor Show in Frankfurt, when I did this upselling, they sentenced me preventively. The first time in Bavaria that someone was in prison for preventive reasons and was supposed to spend 5 days in prison, in the youth prison. I had one phone number of a lawyer, and I didn't write it down precisely. So at all the time, I didn't know whether people who are outside know that I'm in prison. I was not prepared for this. And this experience motivated me because I am a law student. My strength, my power will be used. All I have is invested in this fight. People who have the power, the strength to get up, to understand that they are not alone, that they have a legal assistant, that they know that there will be consequences, but they are not alone, that they are well prepared, that people help them. And this is the main motivation, the main part of my activism. And sometimes I take part in protests myself. As you said, the Bavarian Museum in Potsdam. Here again, this emotional power of the crisis, I feel it, and I would like to show and have to show for myself, I'm no longer playing the game, I'm doing something. And jointly with all the people who give all their power for this fight.
Ja, ich finde das.
I think this is extremely interesting, revealing to hear this from you, because you are describing to us a kind of motivation for protest. What makes you take that decision? I would like to take a step back, though, and ask you about the role of protest. What role does protest play in a democratic society? Why do we have the freedom of assembly? Why is it such a high ideal? Joschka, maybe I can get started, and maybe Paula adds her brighter ideas. The freedom of expression, assembly is the same thing really as freedom of expression, because people who are not represented normally, because you're not directly involved in political discourse in parliament or media, but they still can put their opinions, make it heard. So this is the physical thing about it, making heard. And the Federal Constitutional Court has taken a decision about freedom of assembly. This was about Brokdorf, anti-nuclear power plant, and it defined the freedom of assembly untrammeled democracy, whose purpose is to tear politicians out of their routine. So this shows that the Federal Constitutional Court accepts that this is something disruptive, something untethered, and or untamed, and that's why the climate movement also is an act of political participation. Paula's point of view. Just an addition to that, looking around here, we're all sitting here and benefit, everyone, from things which have been fought for by protest movements. For example, a just pay, the just pay principle, the 8 hours working per day, or the women's right to vote, or the stop of racial segregation in the US, where Rosa Parks started a movement, civil disobedience. You have to realize, you have to try and realize how much we are benefiting from what other people have been fighting for previously, and this means that this is a part of a civil society. Well, it's in the nature of democracy that we do not always agree, and that we try to use protests in order to be heard with opinions which are not shared by many other people. So, to what extent is it surprising? If you are protesting against the status quo or economic interests, is it surprising that there is this development now, even in democracy, which we have always thought they were intact democracies? Or are we seeing a development away from democracies in general in society, which is just reflected by this? Maybe I should get started with this. Well, this question of chicken or egg is difficult to answer. What is the origin and what is the effect of what we are seeing now, or witnessing now? And I would also disagree to say that the rule of law and institutions in Germany are influenced by, for example, the population who are more inclined to vote for extreme right, and they are infected basically by this population. It's the boring thing about the rule of law. It's a big term, like democracy, but it relies on institutions and processes which are detailed, which are boring, making requests to authorities, which are then decided upon, getting some instructions, and then objecting to that. And so everything is working more or less, but it's tedious. And what worries me about this topic, and also of this topic of the panel, is that parts of the rule of law are no longer taken seriously as before. Maybe because people disagree or people are not willing to do so. But people doing without these the due process, for example, just locking away climate activists, not going to court against them, but locking them away preventively, bypassing courts basically. And we've heard from a different article of law, which is also part of our democracy, Article 129. I'd like to ask you to maybe respond to that and help us non-lawyers and explain to us non-lawyers what is exactly contained in this article, and what kind of jurisprudence there has been, what kind of case law we have about this. Are there any famous cases and lawsuits, so that we can understand the context of the lawsuit against the last generation? Well, I can try to do that. I can't really give a comprehensive answer, but I'll try to do my level best. Of course, you can also start. Well, I can try to do that because I have looked at this article quite closely because I was personally affected. This Article 129, formation of a criminal association, has been around for a long time in Germany and has been used for a long time in order to suppress political movements. This dates back. There was a version of it in the Prussian kingdom when democratic movements resulting from the French Revolution were suppressed. And over time, it became depoliticized, and then at some point, there was a European directive which said Well, this should be the content of this article, roughly, more or less. And there, it is limited to organizations only, whose goal is to have a financial material gain from their activities. And that's why they form a criminal organization. So they're committing crimes for that reason. But this part has been left out of the German legislation, so it is possible to ban movements like Last Generation or Letzte Generation. And you say a road blockade can be a coercion. I think that can be discussed. It's arguable, but then this could be a crime. They are an organization who do it together, so it's an organization which commits crimes. That's why this is covered by Article 129. But what strikes you, if you look at the decisions and the files of courts, for example, they have been bugging our press telephone, for example, for months, and there is a lawsuit going on with Reporters Without Frontiers because freedom of the press was limited because they've been bugging press telephones for us. Or decisions on searches, house searches. It never says in these decisions why or whether basic rights are being limited. Of course, there was bugging going on, but they never respected the freedom of the press. They never respected that this could have a chilling effect, as they say, or a deterrence effect on civil society, getting involved in protests in general, as Joschka just says, because you see on television, or they've been protested against climate change on the road. They've glued themselves on the road. Of course, now they are put into prison, so I'll not engage in these protests anymore. They are not considering this respect. The fact that this actually threatens the freedom of assembly and has a deterrence effect, and this is extremely dangerous. You can see here in the making as an article is being abused or is applied by a state in order to suppress protests, which is an immeasurable risk for democracy, as we can see, and has been developing over the years. And even now, Letzte Generation is being affected, which is a non-violent resistance movement. Maybe I can't come up with such a nice statement by Miriam, but I'd like to also add something there. I think it's completely understandable what she's saying. But what you can also see is the use of this article doesn't make much sense. It's a can opener principle, which gives you the title to uncover secret structures. For example, a drug ring, for example, can be uncovered. But if we look at it in the context of a political movement, then this doesn't really match up anymore, because these are crimes which are being done in the open. Miriam speaks up about what she's been doing. She's not being secretive about it. She's not a criminal person, and is not trying to do something secret. So it's no longer about preparing preparation for persecution of a crime, but this kind of persecution of the crime is a crime in itself. Well, there is a legal dilemma, really, or a kind of conflict, I would say. There is a law, and you say the purpose of it is a completely different one, but it's being applied for your case to achieve something against, to do something against a certain movement. Paula, question to you about this. You called it can opener principle, but another way of thinking about it is what they call weaponization of law, so that the law is used as a weapon for political gain or purposes. And we can know this from other contexts, from societies which have moved away very quickly from a relatively well-working free democracy, liberal democracy, to an autocratic state. Just think about Turkey, for example. Maybe you can come in about that, Paula, as to how this fits the general development in the globally, where we can see that democratic societies are on the decline. I think Joschka mentioned this deterrence effect is in the foreground. And this is something we can actually see happening, no matter what form of government you have. There is a tendency that these narratives, this is a terrorist, this is extremist, and so on, leads to a situation where these articles are created or they are actually applied on this movement. And you can see this everywhere. It's a limitation of the freedom of expression, that there's always the criticism of this is espionage or corruption or this is terrorism. You mentioned Turkey just now. I also mentioned Iran before. But even France, the movement I mentioned, Soulèvement de la Terre, again, that's a law dating back to 2021, and this is similar to our article about criminal organization. Government is trying to ban this. The protest against Cop City in Atlanta, I mentioned that briefly before. We can see again that under these criticism of being terrorism, the supporters are also targeted, and anyone who is even at the margins of these movements, someone who's dying financial donations or something, or putting up posters, they're also being targeted now by the authorities, which is a very worrying tendency. Well, we've heard what kind of effects this has on your movement, Miriam, but maybe you can be more detailed about that now and explain to us what the practical effects of this lawsuit is on your work. Well, our situation is that a few weeks ago only, just to give you one example, 60 professors, legal professors, have written an open letter, signed an open letter, in which they call upon the government to stick to their constitution and protect the livelihood of future generations, and also call upon the government to stop criminalizing the last generation and other parts of the climate movement. But still, I'm sitting here in the hottest September ever, and I'm reading a court case saying that the prosecutor in Neuruppin, which had done the raids, is continuing its investigations against the last generation. It's limiting them to a handful of people and accelerating this lawsuit so that they can be then charged with being the instigators of a criminal organization, which is the next level up. And I read that I am one of these few selected people because, and the reason is, the legal team, which is my work, had thought about the legal consequences of these protests, and in this way influenced the planning of the protests. And we also were trying to overload the courts with our court cases, and this was part of this. And I was the main head or mastermind of this criminal organization. And so, on a daily basis, I'm dealing with people who are affected by being criminalized for their protest. They have to go to court. They are put into preemptive custody, and despite this hatred and this repression, they still have enough energy to stand up and continue protesting. And this inspires me and touches me so much every time. And I'm 100% convinced, I haven't regretted this for 1 second, that I've been investing 2 years of my life, the last 2 years, supporting these people and being there for them as a legal support. And now myself, I'm in a position that I'm waiting on a daily basis for the police to to arrest me and put me into custody because of this charge of forming a criminal organization. And I have to share the knowledge I have so that other people can step in for me, because I'm worried as to what could happen if I'm not available for these people for weeks and weeks because I'm in custody. This is completely mind-boggling, and we're living in a state which is undermining the legal support structures and persecuting the legal support structures of a movement which is calling for a socially just climate protection. This makes me afraid that we are on the road towards an authoritarian state which suppresses or stops respecting justice and our constitution, that we are falling into this trap more quickly than I ever would have thought, and that we're now in a time where everyone, myself, you all, and us all here on stage, we as personally have to stand up to make sure that people speak up for justice and freedom, and we have to take our responsibility, basically.
Ja.
Miriam, the first time that you expressed it in public, that indeed you are being persecuted. They call you one of the rebel rousers, one of the leaders of this criminal organization, as they call it, as they construe it. Maybe you tell us more a little bit about what you think. And I know that you wondered before this event whether you will tell us about these facts or not. So why did you share this information with you, and why did you have doubts before the event? It is not easy. First of all, I think one of the major reasons is that I am scared to be in the general public, because in our society the discourse is polarizing. There is a lot of hatred. And in my apartment, they searched the room of one of the people living in my shared apartment, and the police sent a leak to build newspaper television, and they leaked the street, the number of the house, the entrance, and then you understand you're on the death list of extreme right-wing groups, so you're scared. And at the same time, I decided to say so, because I think it is incredible that the legal support structures are being attacked. And this brings me back to my emotional event when they arrested me preventively, so in Bavaria. And I wondered, I am a law student. I sit down every day and read in my books what we have about our wonderful state based on the rule of law. And I want all of us, all of humanity, to survive. And now I'm in prison. Something is wrong. And that's my responsibility to tell my story. And I am worried, so I would like to tell people about my worry. This concerns the civil society. Our democracy is in danger. We see it in different points. But the time is over where we say, well, Merkel is looking after it. No, democracy has to be understood as what it is, and I am responsible for doing so. And I think it is important, essential. We have enough people. We are enough people in our society, and they know how important it is, what it means to live justice and humanity. And we'd like to convey it, because if we live democracy, if we live commitment, that's what we do. That's how we can do something against these authorities. Joschka, maybe you would like to add something from your perspective as a lawyer. And maybe you can tell us a little bit about the consequences for Miriam if she'll be sued. And maybe tell us a little bit about further processes for her. What might happen next? Okay, it'll be very boring in comparison to this great statement. So Neu European public prosecutor will hand it over to the court. The court has to accept it. It's the interim process, and then we have the core of the penal proceedings. That is the process. It can take place in a couple of days. You can invite witnesses, call witnesses, and the accused can sit with their lawyers and give a statement, and at the end of the day, there will be a sentence. She can be acquitted, she can spend 5 years in prison, she can pay a fee. Various options are possible, and it is remarkable to see if she'll be prosecuted. Hardly ever there are and is prosecution according to section 129, 129, which is used to start a prosecution, but you hardly ever sue someone according on the legal basis of section 129. If she'll be sued, do you see an opportunity to escalate up to the German Constitutional Court? Yes, but before we file it with the German Constitutional Court, this is the highest instance. This is above the normal legal courts and instances. So in the case of Miriam, that might be the certain levels of German courts, and always one higher level and then the next higher level. And it can take a couple of years until this decision's been taken. So let me add something. So what we understand is, so the constitutional level is not taken into account as we understand. And I am very worried, especially on the regional court, who normally doesn't deal with the constitutional law aspect. They might not understand what it is all about. So the mode is, sometimes they persecute someone for a penal court. They say, you are organized, you're a criminal organization. They maybe do not take into account all legal aspects. But even the regional court, if they say, we file it to the next law where I will have my acquittal, it will take a long, long time. And this effect that people will be insecure, people will be deterred from organizing themselves for being committed, because people say, oh, I might be sentenced by a court. That is the very dangerous thing, that it is widely formulated. The wording is such that you depend on the goodwill of your judge. So it's very difficult to make an appeal to the next level court. I'm scared of it because I think it is not completely excluded that I might be sentenced. I am very much convinced of the fact that I did nothing wrong or bad and will continue to be active and committed. And especially if you say you're the leader, you're the rebel rouser, it's a qualification, the ringleader or something, and they talk about 6 months in prison. And I'm not interested in having 6 months in prison. We all understand. Thank you for this assessment. Paula, one question. What can we do? What should we do if democracy, if our rights for liberty and freedom are important, are dear to us? You're a part of Amnesty International, an organization who campaigns and advocates for these rights. So how do we continue from here, from today? It's a big question. So what is important for us is this discourse where we talk about being criminalized. So we should do something against it. If an organization or if activists are being deemed as violent terrorists, as chaotic, as whatever, if you're being called a criminal terrorist, and if German politicians say that you're a criminal, if Michael Roth says this last generation is terror like the Taliban, this is what he said, it has impacts. It has impacts not only on violence on the street, but also if you see the causal activities, it creates a certain climate in our society. And I think all of us, no matter where we work, in our discussions, try to handle it, try to deal with it. And we should wonder what is happening right now. People take to the street. People see that liberty of assembly is very, very important in this country, in our society. And as a human rights organization, we as Amnesty talk to governments abroad, even the German government. So we formulate our requests. But it is really a question about informing yourselves, wonder about how to act as a society. What are you doing in this type of situation on the street? Whether it is okay that people just endanger each other. So this is like a precautious judgment. So what type of narratives is before this judgment? Thank you, Paula and Miriam. Do you have anything to say? Yes, one can discuss And one point that is very important is that we understand what is important for us. We mention it today. Being human, conveying justice. So don't only watch the latest Instagram or the latest news, but be more vocal. Take to the street, just like the people who are experts in constitutional law who take to the street, who organize themselves. And no matter what it is, maybe in your little town, in your village, you work with refugees, you work in your municipality and are active. Many ways to be active. So I kindly ask all of you, I'd like to call upon you, be active. Democracy can only work if we are active. Democracy doesn't mean that we are governed by the lobbyism of the fossil energy lobby. We have to speak up in public, outside of our home. So the time for this conversation is over. So the talks will continue, and they should continue. They shall be intensified. And we should talk to each other, and we should show that we are respecting each other, that we are interested in each other. I would really like to say thank you. And the majority are maybe not people with a legal background. So this is a very important discussion. Thank you, Paula Zimmermann, Miriam Herrmann, and Joschka Seelinger. Thank you to everybody for listening. Thank you.